this time it's recording. I think the sound will be a little better. And I brought a couple of markers. Oh yes, I also brought the attendance sheet. So can you guys circulate that? I can't even look at you. I want to talk to you, but I have to keep my mouth at the mic, yes? So, what are we going to do today? We're going to have a bit of an introductory lecture to economics. Okay. Okay, so just a little bit of what is economics, what do we study as part of economics, why do we do it, what are the main ideas in economics, and we'll finish with a bit of an example for calculating efficient quantity based on marginal cost, marginal benefit. We'll learn what are those, right? But we'll start with the reason for existence of economics as a study in general, okay? And the reason is because our wants are greater than our resources, okay? Even if you're one of the richest men in the world, I don't know, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, whatever, right? I think even in that case, the wants are likely to be greater than the resources, right? You will agree with me if I will tell you that resources doesn't only include money, right? Resources can be measured in other form as well, like time, for example, right? Even if you are the richest man, the richest woman in the world, you still have 24 hours in the day, and most likely anywhere between 70 and, I don't know, 100 years, right? We don't live longer than that. So even if we look at some of the richest people in the world, their wants can be huge. They might want whatever they want, right? Maybe they want to have a chance to travel to the moon. We have this opportunity kind of theoretically, right? We have been to the moon sometimes, so if you're some of the richest people in the world, maybe it's not extremely impossible, but it's highly unlikely, right? Maybe you, in addition to that, want to, I mean, wants are basically unlimited. Maybe you want to be able to visit all of the most beautiful islands in the world as well. Even if you have enough money for that, perhaps you don't have enough time for that, right? So generally, for everyone in the world, okay, our wants exceed our resources, okay? And that situation is called scarcity, okay? Scarcity is why we have the study of economics. Okay, scarcity makes us make choices. Okay, because of scarcity, we have to make choices, right? Because I want to have this and that, and also a bit of this. I want to have a nice sports car. I also want to be able to afford all the holidays in these nice places, right? Well, I don't have enough money for all of that, so I have to make choices. Either I go for a holiday, right? Or get this, I don't know, a new bike or something, right? So we all have to make choices. By the way, talking about economics, very often in economics, we call choices trade-offs. Okay, because whenever you choose something, okay, it's same as basically trading one thing for another. It's same as basically exchanging one thing for another, even if it's not so obvious, right? For example, if I choose to go for a holiday, right? Am I trading off holiday for something else? Am I like exchanging it for something else? Perhaps it's not so obvious, but because I spend resources on the holiday, even if this holiday is free for me, right? I spend my time going to the holiday. That's also a resource, right? There are different kinds of resources: human resources, financial resources, time resources, right? I still could have done something else with that time instead of going to the holiday, right? So even if, like in our everyday language, right, we don't actually see any kind of exchange happening whenever you choose to do anything, right? For economic way of thinking, right, there is always a trade-off with whatever you do, with whatever you decide to do. For example, even coming to this class, right? This particular class, just coming for these 3 hours today, is generally free, even though you had to pay for the semester, right? Whether you attend today or not doesn't give you any discounts from what you had to pay for the semester, right? So this particular class today is kind of free, right? But you still have to kind of face a trade-off when you decide to come here, right? Even though you don't really have to pay with financial resources for staying here for 3 hours, because you could have done something else with those 3 hours, right? So you exchange basically the possibility, more like abstract possibility of doing something else with those 3 hours for sitting here for a couple of hours. And by the way, for the third hour, we'll go to the computer lab where you will do your practice, right? So if you watched that brief video on Moodle for last week, I mentioned that every week, or like nearly every week, except for maybe exam times and stuff like that, nearly every week for the third hour of the class, you will have a weekly test, and that is a graded test, right? So there are only 3 ways for you to pick up some points to pass this course: midterm, final exam, and those weekly tests. Okay. During those weekly tests, you can help each other. So that's a bit of a gift for you guys to pick up a lot of kind of easy to collect points, so that passing this course will be relatively easy. During the exam, of course, you can't help each other, right? So, because of all of this situation of scarcity leading us to make choices, right? How do we make choices? Well, choices are affected by our incentives. What do we like and what we don't like, right? Incentives, right, is a combination of what we like and what we dislike. Okay. So because of all of this situation, economics is a study of how individuals, firms, societies make choices or make trade-offs, okay? So this morning I've uploaded a new PDF document to Moodle explaining all of this. So if you'd like, you can take notes now. If you'd like, you can read that PDF document later on. If you'd like, you can watch this video later on when you have time, right? So yes, actually I'm giving you a definition of economics right now. Perhaps some of you might want to take notes, but if you are not, don't worry, right? It's all in the new, this lecture number 1, lecture 1, new PDF document on Moodle. Economics is basically a study of how individuals, firms, and societies make choices and how those choices are influenced by incentives. Okay, so as an example, guys, we'll have a look at the marginal cost, marginal benefits, the incentives for me to, well, in this example, we'll have a look at eating ice cream. Okay, how those affect my choices. Right, so that's what economics is, right? And that's basically divided into 2 sections, as I've also mentioned in that short video for last week, week number 1. We have microeconomics. Micro is small from Latin, right? So microeconomics looks at the choices of individuals and firms, right? If you're running a firm, you're going to choose how much output to produce, how many shoes to make, how many t-shirts to make, right? You don't want to make too many, even if you can, if the demand for your t-shirts is not there, right? So that's individuals and firms. Those are the sort of questions that microeconomics tries to answer. Okay, how much ice cream to eat? We will actually look at this near the end of this lecture. Or how much output to produce from the perspective of the firm. We'll also have a look at that later on, near the end of the semester. And next semester, Economics 2, if you take it, perhaps it's required for some of you, I'm not sure. Anyway, so in next semester for Economics 2, we're going to look at macroeconomics. Macro is large from Latin. So that looks at larger entities such as society, the whole nation, maybe some global issues, right? How come unemployment is so high, right? Or how come inflation is changing? How come prices are changing, right? So those kind of issues. Societal issues like unemployment, like inflation, and so on. Okay? So I continue to explain before I move on to the next topic. I noticed that so far it's all kind of descriptive, where we are not using any math, where we are not using any charts, we're not using any economic models. We will use those, okay? Most of the semester is going to use some sort of simple math, don't be afraid of that. It's going to use some sort of simple charts, okay? Perhaps it's just mostly this week where most of this is kind of descriptive, okay? So if you find it a little bit boring, I apologize for that. I do find it somewhat boring when it's like a lot of descriptive stuff without practicing some sort of thinking, okay? But basically, there are a couple of big questions in economics that anybody has to answer, right? For example, if you are running a firm, one big question is, what goods and services to produce as a manager of the company, right? How to produce those goods and services, okay? Let's put question marks here. And for whom are those goods and services going to be produced, right? As part of the second question in economics, we'll look at something called factors of production. Okay, so let's say, for example, we're looking at, I don't know, production of whatever, say pizza. Okay, what do I need to produce pizza on a large scale, not just at home? Let's say in a pizza restaurant. Well, I probably need a restaurant, right? So I need a space, I need a kitchen, I need an oven, I need other equipment like plates and other cutlery and things like that, right? I need. Do I need electricity? I need electricity. Do I need water? I need water. Do I need soap? I need soap. I need dough, flour, or I don't know, flour plus water makes dough, I guess. Do I need salt? I need so many things, right? And of course, we can't go into too much details. Economics generally is kind of more generalized study of how firms make decisions without going into too much details, right? So there must be a way to kind of try to describe how things happen without going into too much details. For example, look at a map, right? If you have a paper map, or even nowadays electronic map, Google Maps, right? If you look at a Google map, it's a Google map or a paper map, it's pretty good at explaining how things work in terms of getting around to places, right? But it doesn't go into too much detail of where exactly is a pothole on the street, right? Where the smells are not as nice because of the shops nearby, right? Yes. So basically a map is like a simple model of the real city, right? Same in economics, we're going to use a lot of economic models, right? They kind of generally try to describe how the real the world works without going into too much detail. So, for example, how do we produce pizza? Well, we're gonna take all of these ingredients, so many ingredients. We haven't even mentioned chef yet. That's a basic, like a very important ingredient, right? We haven't mentioned any waiters yet either, right? So we have so many ingredients. We combine them, right? Hopefully, manage this place well so that it can survive. Then we can have a thriving business, right? So without going into too much detail, right? Usually in economics we categorize things, right? So in this example, we categorize the way to produce things using these factors of production. Okay. So there are 4 types of resources. Okay. Labor resources. Okay. So that's your waiter, that's your chef, right? Capital resources. Capital resources is all your long-term assets, like the restaurant itself, yes, the oven, everything that lasts over generally longer term rather than like fork and knife. I don't know, maybe fork and knife can last for a while. Is capital resources, and also we also throw in human capital here. Okay. Human capital is skills and abilities. Okay, so you can build up, you can invest into your human capital. If you spend a lot of time learning how to do things, that will improve your skills and abilities, right? Same as with investing into physical capital. Okay. We also have natural resources. We categorize all of that as land. So electricity, water, the actual land for the restaurant to sit on, right? What else could it have? Gas to cook, right? Unless we use electricity to cook. So anything related to nature is all in this category, although it just says land. Everything under the land as well. And, right, even if you have all the ingredients, if you ask me to run that restaurant, everything's already there. Everything is ready for me to just start managing it. Perhaps I'll ruin it because I'm no good as a manager, right? Perhaps I'm good as an investor. Perhaps I'm good as a professor, hopefully. You can tell me, right? But I might not be good as a restaurant manager, so the 4th important factor of production is entrepreneurship, is the ability to be able to combine all of the other factors of production to build a successful business. Next, for whom, of course, we have to have our target audience, right? Perhaps pizza is for, I don't know, whoever loves pizza in Goshen, right? Or if you're making kids' shoes, then perhaps you should better sell them in the city where the population is generally younger rather than too old, yes? Perhaps not in some mountainous villages in Japan where maybe most of the population are elderly, right? It will be hard to sell kids' shoes in a mountainous village in Japan where 80% of the population are old people, right? But on the other side of the trade, for those who are selling, right, who is getting the benefit of all of that, right? Here we look at the payments for each of these factors of production. They have names, okay? So of course, wages go to the employees, those who supply the labor resources. Interest goes to those who supply capital resources. And again, this is a generalization, right? There are different kinds of capital resources, right? If you borrow if you borrow, what is it, the oven from me, I'm not sure what I'm going to charge you. Or if you use my building for your restaurant, perhaps I'm going to charge you rent, right? So it's a bit of a confusion because it's not really interest, right? Or if I invest 10 million NT into your business to help you start the business, right? I am going to charge you interest, right? So again, with specific examples of different types of capital, such as 10 million NT to start you to help you start a business, or if I actually lend you the space for that restaurant, right? There are different things that I'm actually going to charge you for that capital that I provide to you, right? But again, with generalization, we just have one name for all of those categories of payments. In economics, it's called interest. And here's the confusing part. Very confusing is just the term in economics is used differently, right? All of the payments for land-related resources are called rents. Okay, so in our daily life terminology, in the way we use words every day, right? If I have a building and you use my building to as a restaurant, right? In our daily life, I would charge you rent, right? Yes, every month you'll pay me rent, right? But in economics, it's a science. It's a different kind of study, right? Sometimes scientists have their own terms, right? That would be categorized as an interest because I'm providing capital to you, right? Whereas if you are paying for my electricity, if I'm my electricity generator, right, then that will be called rent. So a bit of confusing. It's a bit of a difference from the day-to-day language, day-to-day terminology. And of course, after all of those costs, everything else that is left, which is a profit, will go to those who are actually running the business. Okay. Okay. So that's the factors of production and the payments for those factors of production. Okay. Next. We move on from these three big questions in economics to one more interesting question. Which is self-interest versus social interest. Okay. So what I want is what I want, right? What you want is what you want. What he wants is what he wants, right? And what we might want as a society living in Kaohsiung or living in Taiwan or living on this planet, right, might be completely different from what I want, right? It might be the case that I would like to save the planet, hence I don't know, don't drive that sports car because it's more polluting to the environment, right? So in this case, perhaps my wants are kind of aligned with general humanity to try to save the planet, right? But again, this is just a specific example. In many, many cases, because I might want so many different things to want, right? My individual wants might be quite different from anybody else's wants or from the society at large, right? If I want to have that loud, dirty sports car, right? That's what I want. Okay. Will I be able to get it? Yes, there are companies making those cars, right? It might not be in the interest of the society, right? So there are examples where these interests, self-interests and social interests clash, but amazingly, that's a huge kind of discovery of economics that was like that was over 100 years ago by Adam Smith, the father of economics. Right? Amazingly, for many of our wants and needs, the wants and needs of an individual align with the wants and needs of the society. You wouldn't really expect it because there are so many different people and different people want different things, right? How come what we want as a collective often aligns with hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people's desires and wants? Like, for example, after this class, what are you going to do? You probably will be hungry, right? Is that right? You might go to the mall to grab something to eat, right? Will there be something to eat? There will be, right? Will there be enough to eat for you, for all of you? Most likely, yes, right? And drink as in general, as a society, we are able to satisfy all of your wants. Somebody is also wanting to work in that mall to provide you the food and drinks, right? Of course, they have their motivation for that, right? Of course, they collect profits from that, right? But how come, for example, even the general quantities align as well, right? Perhaps sometime between 12 o'clock and 2 o'clock, 1,000 people will visit the mall, right? How come the total output of food in the mall, this is like kind of social output, right? It's like what the society wants to do in terms of how much food to produce, right? Is more or less enough for everyone, right? Generally, if you just think about it without studying it too much, it's a bit of a surprise. Nowadays, of course, it's all very natural, right? But if you look at it from the perspective of over 100 years ago, right, where people didn't really know as much about sciences, right, it was a bit of a discovery. Okay, so Adam Smith even called it the invisible hand, right? How cool is that? The invisible hand, right, is the idea that how surprising it is that even though there are thousands of people with their different needs and wants, right, very often the society in general is able to satisfy all those different wants and needs. There are some exceptions where the clash is really quite drastic and there is no way to resolve the clash without somebody else's involvement, right? So for example, during our lunch break, we don't need the government involvement to make sure there is enough food for everyone, right? If we just leave the things for the society to work out for themselves, right, there will be a profit motive for people to create enough food for us, right? So it's kind of surprising that the motives are there to supply the needs, right? And this is the case for most activities that you look at, right? If you want to drive a car, right, there's a motive for someone to satisfy that motivation, right? And they can have a profit out of that, right? But there are several examples, few examples, where the clash between the social interest and self-interest cannot be resolved without third-party intervention. Okay, like for example, externalities. And we might study these near the end of the semester if we have time, but most likely won't. Externality, okay, there are negative and positive externalities. Let's look at negative externalities. Is a negative effect from someone's activities onto someone else, right? So let's say, for example, if I listen to loud music, that disturbs my neighbors, right? And there is no kind of self-resolving mechanism for two parties to benefit from achieving what's good for the society. So let's say we have a building of, I don't know, 20 apartments, so we have like 19 neighbors besides me there. I'm blasting music out loud, right? 19 people are kind of discomforted because of that, right? Of course, we can come to an agreement, but in that case, I would be the one to give up on something. I would have to concede, say, okay, I'm not going to blast the music, but I'm going to lose out on this, right? It's different from the example when you are going for lunch. You want to have food and other people want to give you food, right? So in the case of this negative externality, right, this can't be resolved without a third-party intervention, right? That's why we have, I don't know, rules after 9 o'clock. You'd better not blast the music, right? Because there are rules, yes, introduced by, well, someone, third party, right? Perhaps a committee of neighbors or whatever, right?
What about if 19 people in the building are blasting music and only one person wants to be in quiet?
Yeah, that's still an example of an externality, because he is still negatively affected by others. Yes, that's right. There are also positive externalities. Like, for example, if I maintain a nice garden, right, that's good for a lot of my neighbors, right? So it would be in the social interest for me to spend more effort to maintain the garden. Perhaps then other people's garden will look better as well because a lot of the bees attracted to my nice garden, right? There will be more bees if I maintain the garden even better. And if there are even more bees, then pollination and everything will affect a lot of other people. Plus, people really like to, like, I don't know, have a nice garden in their neighborhood, right? So it's in the social interest for me to spend more efforts maintaining my garden. But perhaps it's not in my individual interest, self-interest, right? We'll have models for that with charts showing optimal quantities and how these optimal quantities are not aligned with the socially optimal quantities. All of that will be really, really interesting. For now, if you find it boring, I really apologize for that because I kind of have to give you some sort of an introduction. So it turns out that everything is kind of descriptive, where I just put words here, right? Without showing how cool all of this looks like on the charts, okay? But once we have time, we'll go through the details and it'll be more interesting. Okay. What time is it? Let me check if it's time for a break. Nearly, yes. Okay. So that's one other big issue in economics. And next, moving on to those incentives that I mentioned affect the choices in economics. Okay. We try to model things in economics, right? We're going to use a lot of economic models. Maybe you've heard about some of them, like demand and supply, right? And there is a chart for that. It helps to figure out something. We'll talk about that later, right? There is a model for externalities, right? There is a model for optimal production, stuff like that, right? So we try to model a lot of things in economics. The way we try to model incentives is with marginal benefit and marginal cost. So, marginal, what is the meaning of marginal? Marginal is just additional, right? Just from a general language. If you look at your notebook, some of the notebooks, if you look at the page, might have a margin over here, right? There's like a vertical line and a bit of extra space left beyond that vertical line on the page, right? That is called a margin, right? Kind of just an additional space. Okay, so just a simple meaning of marginal is additional. All right? We do know what is a benefit, something good that you get from anything, from eating ice cream. Do you like ice cream? If you do, then you will get some benefit from eating it, right? Some sort of satisfaction, right? If you don't like ice cream, then perhaps you won't get benefit, and that is fine, right? And there are costs as well, right? If you want to get that ice cream, you'll have to pay. That is part of the costs, right? But there are also other costs as well, perhaps health costs, stuff like that, right? Perhaps the health costs of the first ice cream are low, but if you eat 7 ice creams, perhaps even though the monetary value of the additional and additional and additional ice cream is the same, right? The effect on health is greater, right? So there are different kinds of costs, and the meaning of marginal is additional. So basically, it's looking at the benefits of any kind of action, eating ice cream, or driving a car, or spending 3 hours in the lecture, right? Or buying a chair, doesn't matter, right? At a per unit basis, looking at costs and benefits at a per unit basis, right? So it's additional benefit from one more unit. Okay, and same here. Additional cost from one more unit. Right? So, for example, let's look at marginal cost of, I don't know, let's say ice cream. Right? Let's say the marginal cost of ice cream consists of 2 things. For example, right? Money that you have to pay for ice cream, right? And let's say some kind of health concerns, health issues, right? So if we go first, second, third, fourth, fifth, 5 ice creams here. If buy one ice cream, the price of it, I don't know. I think the ice cream in McDonald's costs 18.80 or something, right? So one ice cream is 18.80. Second ice cream, not two ice creams, that would be total cost, right? It's a different curve. We're going to talk about that separately. So at a per unit basis, second ice cream would still cost 18, right? Third would still cost 18, right? And fifth would still cost 18, right? So within some kind of reasonable range, perhaps up to, I don't know, 380 ice creams or whatever, the price will generally be the same. If you want anything beyond that, McDonald's is not able to produce over 400 ice creams per hour, for example, right? So you have to build another McDonald's there. That's a huge investment, right? So then per ice cream costs are going to jump, right? But within some reasonable range, price perhaps is flat, right? But perhaps health concerns are kind of rising, right? Right? So looking at the total cost, I'm sorry, not total cost, it's a different issue, but looking at the total combined marginal cost per ice cream, per unit, right? If I add this line plus this line, right? I add this distance to this distance, right? This is 18 plus another 10, right? The total, no, it's not total. The marginal cost of the first ice cream will perhaps be somewhere there, right? Then add this distance plus this distance of the second ice cream, then add this distance plus this distance of the third ice cream, we'll get a rising marginal cost curve for each additional ice cream. Because marginal is per unit. It's rising not because we need to pay more for more ice creams. It's looking at them per unit. It's rising because the health concerns are greater as we eat more and more ice creams, right? Similarly, marginal benefit curve. Okay, marginal benefit curve looks at the benefit at a per unit basis of an ice cream. So if you really want some ice cream right now, you're dying for an ice cream, right? The benefit you'll get is great, right? Because that will give you a lot of satisfaction somewhere here, very high, right? You finish this one and you're like, let's go for a second one, right? Perhaps the satisfaction isn't going to be that high already because you aren't dying for an ice cream already, right? And then perhaps as you go up to the fifth ice cream, perhaps the benefit is negligible, right? You're kind of eating it, it's kind of sweet, but you're already full with ice cream. Not much benefit, right? So generally, okay, marginal benefit curve is downward slope, okay, for whatever activity you take. We've been talking about ice cream, but this applies to any activity. Chairs. Let's say you have an apartment that you'd like to have enough chairs in, right? If you have 0 chairs, the first chair will be very valuable, right? You'd have at least 1 chair there, right? If you have a family of 4, right? Perhaps up to 4 chairs, each of them will be really valuable, right? Additional chairs will be nice. Maybe sometimes you'll have some guests, right? So the marginal benefit, additional benefit of the 5th chair, not of 5 chairs together, right? Of the 5th chair will be pretty good. Not as high as of the first 4 chairs, right? But it's going to be pretty good as well as the 6th and 7th chair because maybe you'll have 3 guests coming at the same time, right? But the marginal benefit, the additional benefit from the, I don't know, 23rd chair, not from 23 chairs, but just from 23rd chair is negligible. Almost no benefit. Actually, perhaps only costs, right? You do have to pay for it and you have to have some space for it. So anything you look at in economics generally follows these principles. Marginal benefit generally goes down. Marginal cost generally goes up. Even chatting with your friends, right? You are sitting at home in the evening and you decide to start chatting with your friends, right? Is it enjoyable? Yeah, right? The first, let's look at the per unit basis. What's the unit here? It's kind of tricky, but let's say it's per minute basis, right? The first minute is really enjoyable. Second minute is pretty enjoyable. Third minute is quite enjoyable, right? Fourth minute is enjoyable, right? Fifth minute is not too bad, right? The 6th minute is fine, right? But the longer you do it, the satisfaction is less, and the costs are higher because you're losing sleep. That's health concerns. Perhaps you're losing time on brushing up your economics. That's grades also costing as well, right? Yes. So any activity you look at, generally it follows these principles in economics. Marginal benefit generally goes down as you have more and more and more of this activity, and marginal cost generally goes up as you have more and more and more of this activity.
How about if you add sentiment or emotional value to something? Like, let's say, chatting with your girlfriend. The marginal benefits won't go down.
Well, yeah, very good question. I think you can split marginal benefit into more details, just like you can split factors of production into more details. But still, let's say, for example, this is the activity of chatting with your girlfriend, right? Well, what are the benefits here? Some sort of sentimental value, right? Some sort of a homesickness value, because perhaps you're in a foreign country, the girlfriend is back at home, she can tell you what's happening to you, to your lovely city, or to your friends as well, to your family, right? So there are a lot of benefits there, yes, right? But let me ask you this. As you talk to your girlfriend over the first half an hour, perhaps the benefit is huge, right? As you talk to your girlfriend over the seventh half an hour, right? That's already the seventh half an hour, that's the time between 3 hours and 3.5 hours, right? Would you agree that the sentimental value of that seventh half an hour is less than the sentimental value of the first half an hour?
I would say it depends on the conversation.
Depends, right? But yeah, okay. Perhaps I can have a chart like this, right? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a particular example, but in general, the idea is it's declining. It doesn't have to decline fast, right? Or maybe it's even more like this, right? So I think it still applies. I think it still applies. Great question. When you have questions, the class will be more interesting. When you pretend to listen and pretend to teach, then it's kind of one-way interaction, less interesting. Any other questions? Let's go for a break.
Sure.